because sarcopenia and, poor circulation, loss of circulation to the fingers, the toes, the lowering of the growth hormones, the IGF-1, the BDNF, these are really crucial factors that slow aging. And when I look at you and you tell me you're in your mid-70s, I'm like, really? Seriously, I'd have thought you're in your mid-50s. For something, you must be doing something right?
I'm sunburned right now. I went out, we're finally getting some spring sun, and I went out the other day, I got red.
Well, you got a bit of a glow on. That's good.
Not from the Kaatsu.
Not from the Kaatsu. But this is so crucial for people who are rehabilitating, who can't move, or older people who can't move, or like my mum who has disabilities and can't move or can't do a heck of a lot. They can do this and get an increased response from their training, or for athletes who are wanting to build better muscle, build better fitness, build better cardiovascular fitness. It just has so many longevity and brain health. Like if we just talk for a minute about brain health, neurogenesis, cerebral blood flow, these are also things that Kaatsu does.
Well, in the list of questions that you sent me, one near the end was about what are the future developments for Kaatsu? What are you thinking? Where is it going? And the answer to that is really about the brain. There are two studies that are ongoing, one in Japan and one in Switzerland, where they're looking at measuring the blood flow changes to the brain with Kaatsu. And they're able to validate that the blood flow increases and the blood volume increases in the brain. And when you couple that with the idea that the blood that's coming in has been enriched with these enhanced levels of the biochemical factors we've mentioned, like BDNF, to rebuild that is called the brain-derived neurotropic factors, that is critical for maintaining good cognitive support. When you couple that with more blood flow, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, and this is what happens when we exercise. We do get more BDNF, more IGF-1, more growth hormone. And so anybody who's sedentary or older or disabled or whatever reason, they're not getting those benefits. And as we get older, those decline anyway in their production. So by supporting this, we're going to be supporting our brain health. And like I work a lot with people with dementia, with Alzheimer's, stroke, TBIs, concussions. It's one of my areas of focus. So I'm quite excited about adding this into people's regimes, right? That they can actually do this even if they've had a concussion or they can't train or they whatever,
Well, and the thing to think about with Kaatsu, the easiest way to think about it, to pigeonhole it, it's almost like exercise without having to do the exercise.
Yeah.
Because the physical effect of having this cyclic, gentle compression in the banded limbs creates a gentle accumulation of blood in the limb. With these micro movements, whatever you're doing, it's producing lactate. And that lactate enriched blood, when the bands are released and it flows in through the body, is the chemical trigger that causes the release of all these good factors. So you don't have to knock yourself silly in the gym to get the goodness, the biochemical goodness of these factors that include stimulating muscle to become bigger and stronger. Wow. So for instance, Dr. Sato, let's go back to him for a moment. He looks fabulous. He's big and strong. He has really significant, large muscles that any person wanting to build muscle would admire. But he does not use heavy weights.
Wow.
And this is what is so difficult for people to get their minds around until they've used Kaatsu. They don't understand how that could be. Dr. Sato's, in general, his protocol, he'll do what we call a passive set first thing in the morning. That means you put your bands on, you run the Kaatsu on low, and you're sedentary. You might be answering emails or making phone calls or just relaxing. And he considers that his warm-up set for his vascularity, for his cardiovascular system. It's just a way of tonifying the vascular system. Then later in the day, he may have a second passive session. But at the end of the day, and I'm not suggesting that all people should do this, but he chooses to work out at the end of the day, and he has some gym equipment, but he doesn't load it with a lot of plates. It's done with very, very low weight. But when the bands are on and you practice the protocol that we use with weights, you can fatigue the muscles and put them into a state of hypoxia very quickly. And that's why you don't need heavy weight, because the muscles are already stressed. The rule of thumb is to use about 20% of the weight that you would normally use without the bands.
Wow.
And the reason,
20%.
yeah, and the reason, I have a photo of a sumo athlete, you know, those great big guys, and he's in the gym with his trainer, and he has his Kaatsu bands on, and he's on a pull down machine, you know, where you press down and there's a stack of plates. He has one plate on the stack, and it looks like he can barely move.
Wow.
It's because at the end of his Kaatsu session, his muscles are completely fatigued. So you don't need that high weight to get that fatigue.
Gotcha.
And this is protective. It keeps the athlete safe from, you know, in the gym, you can overdo and get into trouble yourself from trying to do too much. And with Kaatsu, you get the same benefits with far less weight and practically no risk of injury.
And so that is that because it's hypoxic, like the muscle has got restriction of the blood flow, so restriction of the nutrients and the oxygen coming through. So therefore the muscle's just having to use its whatever's left in its ATP tank, if you like. So is it supporting the mitochondria in its function? Like is it
I don't know enough chemistry to answer that question. But I do know that in terms of the muscle being banded, it does bring a state of hypoxia very quickly to that part of the body. So the muscle is acting biochemically as if it has already done a huge workload.
Gotcha.
You know, when people talk about the pump they get, you can measure your bicep, do one session of Kaatsu and measure your bicep again. It will have grown half an inch for you, and a man, a bulkier person, maybe an inch in girth. And that's just from using the bands.
Wow.
You don't have to do heavy work.
And like I've seen this just with using, you know, in the past I've used just bands to tighten and do some basic weight training to see what effect it had, and because I've heard of blood flow restriction training and so on. And it is amazing the pump that you get, the veins that are, well, even if you go and give blood at the blood bank or you know, a blood test and they put a tourniquet on you and out pop your veins very quickly, right? It's the same sort of thing that's going on. It's just that this is in a much more controlled, cyclic fashion that's actually having an ongoing effect rather than a, you know.
And it's safer and it's comfortable.
Yes,
it doesn't hurt what BFR does.
No, which it does, and you could go too hard and damage the tissue too with
absolutely develop. It's called rhabdomyosis or something.
Yeah, that's when the kidneys. Right. Yep, you break down the muscle tissue, because I've had rhabdomyolysis hundreds of times in my life. Yeah, and you break down the muscle tissue, and then it, you know, clogs up your kidneys, and you end up with all sorts of kidney problems and so on. So you don't want to do that. But coming back to the mitochondria, it must have a mitochondrial benefit as well, and it may be something I can look into a bit further, because you know a lot of people are dealing with dysfunctional mitochondria. So the mitochondria are the little powerhouses in our cell that make the energy, and I bet that Kaatsu is really good for improving mitochondria.
I will certainly get an answer to that question. Because I need to understand more about that myself.
Yeah, well, it's a very nuanced question, you know, but I'm always looking for things that are going to improve our mitochondrial function, because our mitochondria are the little powerhouses that make each of our cells run. And if we can improve our mitochondria, then we will improve our health, you know, and I'm sure this would.
Staying away from blue light, Staying away from seed oils.
Yes, amen.
Important things for
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're spot on there.